in Us, a reflection on love of neighbor in the season of Advent. My name is Brendan Hunter. I'm a Program Director for Leadership Resources at the Episcopal Church Foundation. I'm so glad that you're joining us this evening, taking time out of your busy schedules this Advent season for this wonderful evening with Ali Lutz, who is leading our webinar. Whoops, sounds like we got a little bit of audio interference. Thanks, Miguel. Before we get started, I just wanted to quickly give an introduction to the Episcopal Church Foundation for those of you who may not be familiar with us. The Episcopal Church Foundation, ECF, is an independent, lay-led organization whose mission and service is to strengthen the leadership, financial, and strategic capabilities of Episcopal congregations, dioceses, and other organizations. You can see our desired impacts on the screen, and I'd encourage you to check out our website to see the full array of services, which include capital campaigns, endowment management services, plan giving. We just recently started up a donor-advised fund. We offer strategic solutions. We publish vestry papers, the vestry resource guide, and an array of wonderful resources. And among our programs includes the Fellowship Partners Program, which is actually our oldest and longest running program, which was started in 1964. And this supports emerging scholars and ministry leaders in raising up their capacity as well as the future generation of leadership in the Episcopal Church. We are so delighted to have Ali Lutz as one of our ECF fellows to present as we invite many of our fellows to do so throughout the year. And would just note for everyone that the 2017 fellowship application is currently open and available. So to go to the ECF website to check that out if you're interested and to contact us if you have any questions. So I have done enough talking already for one night, and without further ado, we'll hand things over to Ali.
Thank you so much, Brendan. Can everyone hear me? If you can't, say something in the chat box or write something in the chat box. I want to thank Brendan and Miguel for giving me this opportunity to present to you, and to thank you all for joining this webinar, and to thank ECF. The fellowship that I receive helps me greatly in the work I'm doing as a PhD student, and the work or the webinar that I'm presenting to you tonight is very much the fruit of the academic work that I'm doing. So I am grateful to ECF for the support they give me and for this platform to begin to share some of my ideas with folks doing great work. So I am a PhD student in Christian social ethics at Vanderbilt in Nashville, Tennessee, and I'm writing on the ethics of humanitarian aid and mission. And that grew out of work that I did in global health in rural Haiti for 5 years with a group called Partners in Health, which you'll hear a little bit about through the webinar tonight. In 2012, I was ordained through the Diocese of New York as a deacon and as a priest in the Episcopal Church, and I've served churches in New York and Arizona and Haiti. And I have also lived in a large community with adults with disabilities in London, and I helped resettle refugees in Boston and in Atlanta, which were very foundational and formative experiences in my learning and call to love our neighbors. So I think that's enough about me. The important part, let us pray. Be present and draw near to us, dear God. Energize our minds and enliven our hearts as we listen for your Spirit leading us ever deeper into love and service. Free us from distractions, internal and external, for this next hour. May we receive the gifts and graces of insight you have for us this evening, for the sake of the nourishment of our souls, for the care of the people you have entrusted to us, and for you, dear Christ, whom we bear in the world. Amen. So for the next hour, we're going to meditate together on the love that is at the heart of Christian social witness. And so this is not a workshop on best practices for missions. This is more of an experiment in a web retreat during the season of Advent. And the season of Advent is when we learn to wait. We ponder in our hearts the wonder of God in us and among us. We welcome the salvation and healing of the world, not through powerful efficiency, but through the vulnerability of a baby born in a manger to migrant parents. And so we really need to ask God for that grace to slow down, to take a breath, and to make room to receive the grace of God in our hearts, in our souls, in our bodies, in our minds, so that we can create that space to be bearers of God in the world. So I would like us to begin with a breathing meditation so that we can make room. So I invite you to take a few deeper than normal breaths. As far as possible, wherever you are, sit in a way that's comfortable and that grounds you and opens you. So many people choose to sit with their feet on the floor and their hands open in their lap. And you may close your eyes if you want, or just soften them. As you sit and take a few deeper than normal breaths, draw your attention to your breathing. Notice how it feels. Notice the sensation of breathing. Breath connects us to life in this marvelous way. Breathing is an automatic reflex, and your body will breathe without you having to think about it. And yet, when you draw your attention to your breath, it can give you new perspective and peace. And in this way, breath is like God, always at work within and around you, without you needing to think or ask. And yet when you draw your attention to God, to your breath, God's peace and energy and love open up to you in new ways. So breath connects us to God. The Spirit of God breathed over the waters at the dawn of creation. The Hebrew word for the Spirit of God is ruach, and it literally means breath. It is the breath of God that hovered over the waters at creation. And when God formed humankind from the mud, as we know in our scriptures, we came to life when God breathed into us God's breath. And even that word respiration has within it the word spirit. So breath connects us to God. God is as close as our next breath. So as you breathe, notice where you feel God at work. And breath connects us to our body. To breathe means to have a body that praises God and delights in all that God has created, a body that is good, a body that is loved, a body that God assumed in Christ when God became fully human at the incarnation. So breath connects us to our bodies and to the God who created bodies and took on human flesh. We often forget about our bodies. And so tonight we take just another moment to stretch and wake our bodies up. So on your next inhale, sit up a little taller. And then as you exhale, just let your head float over to the right. Don't push it over. Just let gravity Draw your head towards your shoulder and feel that stretch in the side of your neck. Feel the sensation of stretching. Be aware of that. And breathe here. And on your next inhale, let your head float up to the center. And breathe, being aware of anything that feels different. And inhale, and on your next exhale, let your head float to the left. If it hurts, of course, don't do it and don't force it, but let gravity help your head rest toward your shoulder and feel what that feels like on the side of your neck. And at your next inhale, let your head float to the middle, back to the center. And as you breathe deeply, be aware of what that feels like in your body, having stretched just so gently. And all living creatures breathe. So breath connects us to all life, to dogs, to wildflowers, to other people and trees. Breath connects us to all life and to all living beings. And being aware of our breath, we perceive the truth that all life is truly interconnected and interdependent. And finally, breath is non-dualistic. So breath connects us to mystery and to ongoing, evolving, unfolding process of life and love. Breath is not only an inhale or only an exhale. Breath is both in and out, like the waves of the sea. Breath is an ongoing process, not a goal to be achieved. So if you've closed your eyes, you may let them float open. And now we'll think about an overview of our time, where we're going with this attention that we cultivated with our breath. So tonight we're going to talk about three things: love as attention, love as justice, and love as imagination. And I should say, in all of these ways, we're thinking about love of neighbor. So love of neighbor as attention, love of neighbor as justice, and love of neighbor as imagination. And we'll have moments of reflection in between where you may share if you would like, but you don't have to. And then at the end, we'll allow more time for questions or sharing your experiences or what connections you're making between your ministries and our meditation tonight. So the first topic, love as attention. One of my favorite thinkers on the subject of love is Simone Weil. She was a philosopher, a theologian, a freedom fighter, and a mystic who lived and worked. And I emphasize worked because she worked in a factory in solidarity with workers in France, even though she was a very gifted PhD student in philosophy. She worked in a factory. And she taught and wrote in France in the first half of the 20th century. She wrote a lot about love, and she believes that the substance of love is attention. So to love is to be capable of giving something your full attention. Turning your attention over to someone or something else without thinking about how it fits into your plan, or not thinking about what you're going to say or get in return, but just attending fully to that person in front of you. And Vey writes that, quote, not only does love of God have attention for its substance, the love of our neighbor, which we know to be the same love, is made of the same substance. Those who are unhappy have no need for anything in this world but people capable of giving them their attention. The capacity to give one's attention to a sufferer is a rare and difficult thing. And I think it's rare and difficult. I think what Vey is getting at and why it's so rare and difficult to turn your full attention to someone who suffers is that being present to someone who is suffering touches off our own fear and distress. We don't want to feel that fear and distress, and so we want to do something to make that pain stop, both for us and for the one who is suffering in front of us. And so we focus on the suffering and not on the person who is, in fact, finding a way to survive in that moment. So I think Vey is a good person to think about loving our neighbor. When our neighbor is suffering, the first thing is love as attention. And so love as attention means that we love our neighbors and we attend to them, especially in their suffering, as persons, not as objects to be counted or fixed or healed or changed. And so if we can quiet our own distress that's stirred up when we think about other people's suffering and we want to do something, if we can quiet and listen to people who need love and justice in the face of their suffering, I think we hear the cry, nothing about us without us. And that was a rallying cry, or is a rallying cry of the disability rights movement, as you can see in that image at the bottom. And then the image on the right was residents of New Orleans after Katrina. Nothing about us without us is for us. And so if you're thinking about planning an outreach or a service effort in your parish for a particular group of people, and no one in that community is part of your planning, pause. Take a moment and invite the people whom you feel called to serve to tell you about their lives and their struggles. And ask them what you could do to support them. Because love as attention really means we see our neighbors as partners in transforming the world, not as targets of our best intentions. And the next slide follows up from that. It carries that idea a little bit more. And quoting Gustavo Gutierrez, who was is a priest in Peru, known as the father of liberation theology, lived and worked and taught among very poor people, very poor communities in Peru. And he writes that people who are suffering and oppressed are the protagonists of their own liberation. So when we reach out to help people who are suffering in ways that are so traumatic and really unimaginable to us, we often rush in to rescue people. And this impulse is certainly understandable, but it robs people who are suffering of their agency. And love as attention meets people in their distress. It acknowledges the strength that has enabled them to survive a difficult situation. And love as attention offers support that builds on and extends people's own efforts to rebuild their lives. And I think of Shipra and Pua, the Hebrew midwives, and their community was living under a genocidal pharaoh who decreed that all Hebrew infant boys should be killed. So they were living under a pretty unimaginable kind of oppression, genocide. And they found a way to resist Pharaoh's orders. I think of Moses' mother, who in that same moment, in that same time in the Israelites' history, she acted to save her son. And I think of Jesus and Mary, who flee from Egypt in an act to save Jesus from Herod. And these are the heroes of our faith. And we celebrate them as agents of God's saving work. They're the protagonists. They're the authors and the agents, the actors in these stories. And so what if we think about today's refugees fleeing Syria? What if we think about them in the same way that we think about Moses' mother and Mary and Joseph and the Hebrew midwives? What if we think of Syrian refugees as faithful and brave people taking action to fight to save their lives and the lives of their children, and that their children will grow up to be leaders and teachers and healers and prophets? So love is attention really means seeing people as authors and protagonists of their own liberation and then joining them and supporting them in that. And love as attention requires attention to the social world of the neighbor, so that we see neighbors not only as individuals, though we certainly attend to them as individual people, but we also see what their social world and worldview, how that shapes them. And the example that I offer here is of when I was in seminary and I was working at a shelter for women and children who were homeless. And churches wanted to give gifts to the children at the shelter. And the women who lived at the shelter with their children said, please don't. When churches come in and give gifts directly to our children learn to look to nice rich people to be able to take care of them. And it affects and it harms the relationship that I have with my children if they turn to you for all those wonderful good things that I'm unable to provide them. So instead of giving gifts to the children, could you help us provide gifts for our children? And there was not one church that when we shared this sentiment did not say, oh, of course, and figured out how we could help the women in that shelter provide gifts for their children. And another simple example of this is, and these are the children in this photo, is that when I worked in a church in Arizona, and the church wanted to give gifts and clothing to the children, and the children at the school in Arizona really wanted to not just send money, but it was important to them. They went out and they chose the gifts and they purchased them, and it wasn't just an abstract, we're giving money, but it was, wow, this is a toy I would really like to keep, but we're going to send it to this child in Haiti. And when I took a group down to Arizona to deliver those gifts, we were very clear that we did not distribute, we as the visitors did not distribute those gifts. We gave those gifts to the house parents at the home for these abandoned and orphaned children, so that the house parents were the ones that were providing these gifts to the children. Again, paying attention to the social world of these children. It was so much more important that they felt love and care from their house parents and their adopted parents, and that they trusted them and we didn't want to set up this, well, the nice rich people give us nice things, how come you can't? And so, I mean, it doesn't mean you don't get to interact and have really lovely, wonderful, fun times with people. So instead of coming in, making a big deal of presenting gifts, we just had a party with cake, ice cream, soda, and balloons. And balloons, anybody could have as many balloons as we could blow up, or we inflate, let's say, and kids could have different colors, and they're not permanent. You know, they'll pop and they'll lose their air, so they're not things for the children to hold on to. So we were able to have this really festive celebration together. And then after we left, the house parents distributed the gifts that we had brought, and it attended to those children and those adoptive parents who were trying so hard to support these kids. So now please take a moment. Think of a time when you have experienced love as attention, whether a time when you received and experienced personally love as attention, or you witnessed or you extended love to another as attention. And you can type. And Brendan, can people also speak and share through the microphones?
I think we can do that. Yes, we can unmute some folks and see if that works.
Okay. And no need to share if you just want to take a few moments to think for yourself. Love as attention, a time you have experienced that. I'm going to attend to my dog. Come here, Pepper. Oh, great. Thank you, Lynn. So at St. Andrews in Roswell, you have a monthly breakfast. Wow. And originally you provided meals through a window from the parish hall into the kitchen. But we changed that method by moving the food into the parish hall at a serving table and began to interact in a deeper way with the participants by giving them personal attention. It's beautiful. It's a great example. Thank you for that. Very powerful. So let's continue. I don't see anybody else chatting or typing. So the second aspect of love of neighbor I want to talk about is love as justice. And it follows from love as attention because it's the, oh, are you typing, Brendan? Yes.
Oh, I was just reminding folks that anybody can continue to share their thoughts in the chat box.
Oh, yes, you absolutely may. Yes, Brendan will monitor that for us and for me. So love as justice attends to the social structure of misery. And here I turn to Father Gustavo Gutierrez, whom I mentioned before. And as I said, Father Gutierrez is a Catholic priest from Peru, and he is the father of liberation theology, and he was a priest to very poor communities in Peru. And it really profoundly shaped his thinking and his writing and his teaching about how we know and love God and where we look for God among the vulnerable. And Father Gutierrez asks us to hold together love as attention to the individual person who suffers with the social structural dimension of poverty. So his quote is, If I define my neighbor as the one I must go out to look for on the highways and byways, in the factories and slums, on the farms and in the mines, then my world changes. But the poor person does not exist as an inescapable fact of destiny. The poor are a byproduct of the system in which we live and for which we are responsible. So oppressive and unequal social structures create misery for multitudes of people. So to love our neighbor demands that we attend to that structural dimension that causes their suffering in the first place. And that's what you can think of as love as justice, is attending to that structural level of suffering, asking why are people suffering in the first place? And as an aside, I think it's also important to note how Father Gutierrez says, my world changes. So loving our neighbor, we must be willing to be changed and to have our world changed. Not just about bringing more people into our world. It's about the world changing. And if we're part of the world, we have to be open to that transformation. So love of neighbor is mutually transforming. It's not one way. But now back to love as justice. Another way of thinking about this structural level is what Cornel West says. He says, never forget that justice is what love looks like in public. So justice works to transform systems of care and systems of accountability, so that being shielded from suffering, being able to be shielded from suffering does not depend on who you know, who your parents are, where you live, where you were born, or where you work, those kind of private loving things, family, neighborhood, those personal systems of support. Your ability to withstand suffering shouldn't depend on those. And that's what love as justice gets at. And when we say justice, when I say social justice, I don't mean only laws and political advocacy, although that's certainly a part of it. I really think of justice as social justice is the ability to think systematically about the structures that either support or exclude people. And they're social structures. They can be changed. They're not inevitable. For example, you can work for love as justice in healthcare. This is just one small example. If you do medical missions with your parish, you can think about what are the local systems of care in the community that we serve. So when my medical mission group, we visit a place 2 weeks a year, maybe 4 weeks a year, and when we leave that village, ask, who provides medical care when we leave? And is there any way we can help support that system when we're not here? Could you help pay the salary of a nurse in the local community or in a neighboring bigger city who could? You could pay a nurse salary or travel expenses, or pay for a mobile clinic that could come out on a regular basis when you're not there. So social justice is looking for ways to connect with and strengthen the local systems that support the people you feel called to serve. Thank you. Oh, you all are sharing such wonderful things in the chat box. I can't wait to get back to that. So now take another moment to reflect now that we've got the chat box fired up. Is there an issue of justice that you are passionate about? And how is this issue a public expression of love that should be accessible and available to everyone? Take a moment to reflect on, and if you have thoughts, write them into the chat box about love as justice. And thank you, Teresa and Miguel, for your reflections on love as attention. Very powerful, not, Teresa, what you pointed out, not needing to explain or to justify yourself. It's very powerful to put that, to remind us that part of listening is not asking people to explain themselves or justify what they're thinking or feeling, but to meet them where they are. Thank you for that. And thank you, Miguel. You're helping us connect attention and growth and change. That's beautiful. Wow, Teresa, thank you. Yeah, naming racism as a justice issue is hugely important. And especially helping white people learn how to talk about racism and do the work of dismantling racism as a justice issue. Wow, thank you. Yeah, and Lynn, you're pointing to us how the root causes are very hard to define. Yeah. And to find the small changes that we need. And to holding together that balance of working on a structural issue, but from my individual perspective. You're pointing to you all are getting to the heart of the matter. And Teresa, I think it's very interesting to think about when we think about race and racism and injustice and justice, to think about how is that connected to love. Because there is so much hurt and so much anger. And it's such a dire issue. We have to be strident and yet loving. Exactly. I'm reading your chat box. How to talk about racism as a systemic problem without shaming. Yeah. And that's where I really think the meditation piece is important. We spent a lot of time beginning our webinar with that breath and that breathing meditation, because so much of justice work is learning how to sit with discomfort. And as difficult as it is to watch someone else suffer, it's also extremely difficult to be told you have caused in some way unintentionally the suffering of another, and to learn how do you sit with that and not try to explain yourself or excuse yourself. And I think we really need God's grace to be able to sit in these places and not want to do something to escape that distress and real anguish. It touches off real anguish. So I'll offer, I was going to, I'm going to go back a little bit. I thought in the interest of time I would not share this, but I think I will. Just a thought from Jean Vanier. Well, I'll explain it in one sec. I'll start by reading it. So, Jean Vanier, who founded the L'Arche Communities for Adults with Disabilities, he writes, "To love is not to give of your riches, but to reveal to others their riches, their gifts, their values, and to trust them in their capacity to grow. So it is important to approach people in their brokenness gently, so gently, not forcing yourself on them, but accepting them as they are with humility and respect." And I wonder if, I'm going to just put that in the chat box for you all. I wonder if as we think about justice issues and systems in which anybody who's living in the U.S. is implicated in systems that cause other people suffering, if we could also learn to approach ourselves in this same way that Jean Vanier recommends that we approach the other, that we learn to approach our own brokenness gently, trusting in our capacity to grow, and so we don't have to justify ourselves or excuse ourselves, because we can trust that we can grow in love and in justice. It's not sometimes it's not the heroic effort, but it's a quiet kind of growth that I think is just the kind of growth to be thinking about during Advent, the development and growth of that little one born in a manger. So let's continue on to love as imagination. Yes, here we go. So love of neighbor as imagination. Love of neighbor requires of us the ability to perceive a more just world, knowing that current social reality is not natural or inevitable. And on this idea, I turn to Ada Maria Asazi Diaz, a theologian originally from Cuba. And she writes that oppressive structures are not basic reality, but just the way operative reality has been constructed. What is oppressive has been humanly constructed, and it can be changed. And I want to give you this story as an example of love as imagination, and countering a failure of imagination with a preferential option for the poor in healthcare. And this is the story of Adeline Merson. And she's a friend of mine who lives in Haiti. And she was born and raised in the community of Cange in a very rural part of central Haiti. And in 1999, Adeline came home to Cange, essentially to die. You can see in that picture, she weighed 79 pounds, and she was dying of AIDS. And her family was measuring a coffin for her. But doctors from Partners in Health, PIH, that's the organization I worked with in Haiti, doctors, Haitian and American, hiked to her house and promised to bring back the HIV drugs that would save Adeline's life. And back in 1999, when they did this, the international health community said it was a bad idea. It was a bad idea to put poor people in poor countries on HIV drugs because the drugs were too expensive. At the time, they cost $10,000 per person per year. So the international health community said this isn't sustainable, and poor people in poor countries could not tell time. They could not be trusted to continue taking their medications once they started feeling better. So there were all these reasons why the world was set up the way it was, that could not be changed, that meant that someone like Adeline could not have these medications. Well, Partners in Health did not believe that this was how the world had to be, and they saw Adeline as someone more than just a poor, dying woman. So PIH gave her HIV treatment. PIH trained and employed a community health worker from the community who would bring Adeline her HIV medication 2 times every day. And the community health worker made sure Adeline had clean water and food with which to take her medicine, and that Adeline did not feel isolated or alone. The community health worker reminded Adeline that she was a human being, a person who was part of the community. And so when Adeline regained her strength, she also became a community health worker. She had a community health worker visit her with her medication, and then she would go out and visit another HIV patient with medication. And Adeline did her job so well that she became a community health worker supervisor. And she was such a strong leader that in 2008, Adeline traveled to Boston to speak at Harvard University for a symposium on health and social justice. And that's where I first met Adeline, and we became friends in Boston because, boy, it was cold when she visited. I had to bring her every coat and pair of long johns we could rustle up for her. But so hers is a story that shows the world the way it is. We have to imagine a new world. And so now, all these years later, it costs less than $100 per year per patient to keep people on HIV medication, and millions of people around the world in poor countries receive this kind of medication. And so a huge part of that is imagining that the world can be changed, and then also imagining that individuals can change. And that, again, not seeing Adeline as just a poor and dying woman, but to see her as a leader and to see her as a protagonist of her own liberation. So that Partners in Health, its motto is a preferential option for the poor in healthcare. And that means not only that poor people should receive high-quality health care, but it also means that they should be involved in delivering high-quality health care. So that, babies that are born, or babies that were born in Conj 25 years ago, when Partners in Health was first getting started, the organization didn't just say, oh, well, we need to get this child vaccinated so she can live past her 5th birthday. They said, well, this child needs to grow up to be a doctor. She needs to be the doctor in the next generation. And so then what do you have to put in place now? Little small chicky steps, but to make sure that we can see these big changes over the long haul. And just also on this idea of countering a failure of imagination, or that the people we serve are really the protagonists and authors of their own liberation. I want to share with you an insight from that moment in the Gospel of John when Jesus appears to Peter after the resurrection. And Jesus asks Peter 3 times, do you love me? Feed my sheep. And I remember I preached on that passage in a tiny rural village in Haiti. And I realized that when people who are poor hear that story, they don't think of themselves as the sheep. When you preach that in the U.S., it's people who are poor are the sheep who need to be fed. But even in very poor communities in Haiti, when they hear that scripture, they don't think of themselves as the sheep. They think of themselves like we do as Peter. And they hear Jesus calling them to serve and love their neighbors too. So we have great resources in the Christian tradition for thinking about love as imagination. We have this concept of a new heaven and a new earth. So that loving your neighbor requires imagination, to imagine the world set up in a different way so that people who are poor don't have to be exploited, and people who are vulnerable don't have to be dominated. And this idea of love is imagination means that our work in mission and in service is more than just it's not pulling more people into our world, into the current global order. It's not just making more nice middle-class Episcopalians. It's participating in a whole new heaven and a new earth, a new ordering of the world where love and justice can reign. So we have this image from the book of Revelation where John is, receiving this image of the new heaven and the new earth, where a powerful empire does not dominate the vulnerable. So we have a lot of resources to think about loving our neighbor as requiring our imagination. So do take a moment to reflect. This one's going to be a little more guided. Oh, wow. Thank you, Teresa, for the Magnificat. Love that. This is exactly what we're talking about. I want you to, if you want to close your eyes, but I want you to think of a particular place. It can be in your town, in your city, or it can be around the world, but think of a place that suffers from inattention and injustice, and really picture that place in your mind to the best that you know it, even if you just know, if you just know it from news reports, that's okay. But picture that place, what it looks like, what it feels like, what it sounds like. What does a scene of suffering really look like? Is it bombed out? Is it loud? What does it look like? What does it feel like? And now imagine that place as the New Jerusalem. What if that's the very place which will be transformed so that God's love and justice will flow throughout the whole world beginning from that place? And poetry and prayer and meditation can really help us cultivate and activate this kind of imagination. And so I want to finish by reading you a poem called The Prophet's Speech by Doug Gay. And you'll see, he took the words of scripture and just rewrote them for his city, for Glasgow. And I encourage you all to think about doing this for those places that are really scenes of suffering. Take some time to reimagine them as places of resurrection and love and justice. So this is what Doug Gay wrote about his dear city, Glasgow in Scotland. I saw a vision. It was last Thursday at 11 o'clock in the morning. I was standing on the necropolis, looking down over the city, and the cold blue winter sky broke open above my head, and the Spirit of God breathed on my eyes, and my eyes were opened. I saw Glasgow, the holy city, coming down out of heaven, shining like a rare jewel, sparkling like clear water in the eye of the sun, and all the sickness was gone from the city. There were no more suburbs and schemes, no difference between Bearsden and Drumchapel. I saw the Clyde River running with the water of life as bright as crystal, as clear as glass, the children of Glasgow swimming in it. And the Spirit showed me the tree of life growing on Glasgow Green. I looked out and there were no more homeless people, no more women working the streets, no more needles up in the closes. HIV and AIDS were things of the past. There were no more racist attacks, no more gay bashing, no more rapists, no more stabbings, no more Protestants and Catholics, no more IRA graffiti, no more orange marches, because there was no more hate. And I saw women walking safe at night, saw the men were full of passion and gentleness, that none of the children were ever abused, because the people's sex was full of justice and joy. I saw an old woman throw back her head and laugh like a young girl. And when the sky closed back, her laughter rang in my head for days and days and would not go away. This is what I saw, looking over the Gallows Gate, looking up from the city of death. And I knew then that there would be a day of resurrection, and I believe that there will be a day of resurrection. I encourage you, I'm pretty sure that will be on the notes in the PowerPoint. If not, we can email it out. But to pray with poetry and with your imagination for the people and places you feel called to serve. So I've really, had plenty of time, but we're almost at 7 o'clock. So the next steps, as I say, this wasn't a class on best practices. It really was a meditation for us. So the next steps that Gustavo Gutierrez offers to us are to accept day by day the gifts of the Spirit who makes us love, and our concrete options to build a true human fellowship, and our historical initiatives to subvert an order of injustice with the fullness with which Christ loved us. So my prayer for you is that we could end as we begin with our breath, and knowing that God is as close as our next breath, and to really take that time to breathe and meditate on our work to love our neighbor. So if you want to take a minute to ask a question, please do, but if not, jot down my email and you can email me any questions or reflections that you have.
Well, thank you so much, Allie. This was wonderful. Again, thank you everyone for taking the time out of your busy schedules this evening to be part of this wonderful experience this evening. Just note for everyone in participating before you head off that in your inbox there is a survey to please take a moment to click through and to click on that link and fill that out. It's pretty short, but it is full of very important information that we would need to hear from you. And we, of course, will share this feedback with Allie, as well as that will help us to plan future webinars as well. So with that, again, just thank you all for being part of that. Thank you, Allie, so much for this tremendous presentation this evening and guiding us through this meditation and through all of the content that you presented to us this evening. This is wonderful. Thank you all, and have a blessed Advent and a wonderful Christmas.